Okay, so Game Dev Pipeline Part 2. Of course, it's always a little interesting to pick up a lecture that another professor started, even though this was my material originally. I'm sure Dave has added a number of really good things to it, his own insights, so hopefully this isn't too jarring, what I'm going to say here. Okay, so this little flowchart is basically a hypothetical asset pipeline. Now, this is very hypothetical, right? And it does depend... it is very situational, so it's not like you're going to go to a game company randomly and see this exact thing play out exactly like this. This is all an approximation, like so many of these things we tell you about the games industry. But in general, the flow is something like this. You have a game asset that you might need to be made, right? And we're going to use the example of a dumpster fire. Okay, that's going to be our hypothetical game asset, is a dumpster fire. So, and generally how it happens, if we look at the top of this, I know it's a little hard to see with the lighting in here, your leads, your discipline leads, your producers, they're going to decide that you need the dumpster fire, right? That it's totally necessary asset for your game. And so what kind of happens then is it doesn't just get spoken into existence out of nothing. It has to follow some kind of pipeline, and that's where we get that word pipeline, right? The idea from something in someone's head all the way to like the completed thing in game. And so it's going to be distributed to the various departments. The various disciplines will now take that. So the discipline leads, they'll kind of decide that the thing is needed, okay, but then everyone else gets to do the process of making the thing. So, and if you look at these shapes here, triangle programming, trapezoid, art, triangle, the different shaped triangle design. Yeah, so that's kind of what's supposed to be happening here. So for programming, if the asset requires any, now obviously some assets won't require, any programming at all, really. But the dumpster fire would a little bit. This is why I picked this, other than it amuses me, is we do have damage that the fire has to do. Maybe there's explosive in it, and it has to explode, it has to react to weapons. Yeah?
If you want to use a dumpster fire as an example, why not choose the Crusades?
The what?
The Crusades.
The Crusades as a game asset.
No, they're a dumpster fire.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Right. Well, there was like 7 or 8 of them, and they were all quite different. The Peasant Crusade was certainly a dumpster fire for sure. Okay, so at any rate, what the programmers, they're going to start by doing pseudocode, early prototyping. They're going to think about what functionality has to exist. Pseudocode, if you're wondering what that is, it's basically just trying to write code in a human readable language without worrying about the syntax of the language, right? You're just sort of writing down the logic of something. You're just sort of, it's like the paper design of programming, basically. So you would write an if statement by just saying, in English or whatever language you're comfortable writing in, if this thing happens, right? But you're not worried about, like, is this following C++ syntax or C syntax? You're just working out the logic. That's pseudocode. And doing flowcharts like this is part of the pseudocode, if that's something you like to do. So that's something you see programmers do sometimes. They'll make these flowcharts to kind of try to puzzle out the logic of something. And they might start making early prototypes. That would be something that happens. The concept art starts to get made. So this is the art department here. So they're going to think about what the dumpster fire is supposed to look like, right? So that's going to require a concept artist to do a concept, probably, although I will say an asset as relatively simple as a dumpster fire may not actually need a concept. A 3D artist might be able to just bang that out, without someone taking the time to draw, a reference. But hypothetically, a concept artist would make something like that. Okay, so then the designers would be working on some kind of paper design for how they want the dumpster fire to actually function, right? And I think I'm getting ahead of myself on these slides by just reading my diagram here, so I'm going to continue on so I don't do that. Right, so I've kind of talked ahead a little bit, so let me just press pause and rewind. Right, step one, how do we know we need one anyway? That's going to be, as far as a game asset goes, just like I said at the top of the flow chart here, this is going to be your asset lead, your discipline leads. Usually some combination of game design, programming, and production is going to make that call. And what about the lead artist? They may also be involved, but at least in my personal industry experience, the lead artists tend to be, they tend to get these things downstream from these other departments, right? They're more concerned with how things look. They're not necessarily making the decision about whether or not something exists. But that's just my own experience in the industry. Of course, they can be involved in this initial process of, do we need the flaming dumpster fire? Okay, so again, I'm kind of redoing some of what I've said. Sorry about that. Again, it's been a while since I've given this lecture. I think I developed this lecture in 2019. And Professor Whittinghill's given it every time since I gave it the one time. So step two, producers, discipline leads meet to break down the tasks for that object. So step one is deciding whether or not the asset needs to exist, justifying it, right? Step two is then, okay, let's figure out what tasks have to happen, right, for that asset to be made, okay? And so what I would like you to do, all right, and I'm going to put this in edit mode here so I can actually jot these things down, is for the flaming dumpster fire, what tasks would be necessary to make this? And think about programming, think about design, think about art, visual effects. Yeah.
The lighting for the fire.
Okay, yeah, so lighting, I'll say lighting effects for fire. Yes.
Particle effects for the fire.
Yeah, particle effects, that's good. Yeah, definitely need some cool particle effects. All right, yeah.
Texturing for the dumpster.
Yes, that's right. Materials, textures for dumpster. Okay, back there.
Sound effect.
Yeah, sound, excellent. Glad someone thought of sound. That always makes me feel good when people think about that. Okay, yes.
Environmental interaction.
Right, yeah, so environment, interaction. So yeah, that's like going to be a great intersection of programming and design, right? Because what are those interactions? Does it, in fact, we can do a lot of subtasks with this. Pain, damage. And here is a great moment for me to give an anecdote to all of you for the first time. In fact, you're in my 105 class, so you were going to get this anecdote in the BioShock Infinite postmortem that's coming near the end of the semester. But you're going to get this now, and then you'll hear it again at the end of the semester. So I didn't make a flaming dumpster fire for BioShock Infinite, but I did make something similar, or at least had a hand in something similar. The flaming barrels, or these barrel fires, right, all over the kind of middle part of the game, because it was this shanty town. They would, people would warm themselves by the fire with these things, whatever. And I wasn't, obviously, I'm a designer. I was not involved in the art end of this. But when I would play this level that was already partially built, and these fires, these barrel fires were already there, they didn't do any damage to you, right? And I remember thinking, this cannot stand. This, these should give damage to the player, right? By the way, there's about 1,000 people over my years of a developer that if they could be here now, they're groaning because they're like, Rob is telling the barrel fire story again. It's one of my favorite game dev anecdotes I have personally about my own career. I had no orders to do this, which is probably something you shouldn't do, okay? So I had no mandate to do this. This was totally off script, totally on my own. So here I am, changing, however small, the functionality of a, probably like $70-80 million game or whatever it was. And so I made those barrel fires do a little bit of damage to the player. I just remember I got to be really careful about this, because if this somehow breaks things, I can get into big trouble. And so part of it is I made sure the little damage volumes, Unreal still has damage volumes I attached them to each barrel, so if some artist came in later and moved them around, the damage volume would move with it. That was my main concern, to not have like disembodied damage causing volumes floating around in the world that you would just run into and take damage that you couldn't tell where you got the damage from. You know what I mean? Because you have the barrel and you have the little thingy I attached to it to give you the damage. If those things aren't connected together, someone could move the barrel, but the little damage thing stays, right? That was my main worry. So I really tried hard to make sure it was rigged up so that that could never happen. And then I left the project, right, because I went back to Human Head Studios because that's what my actual employer was. You know, my 6 months on the project had wrapped up, you know, and a couple months later the game comes out, and I'm like, I couldn't wait to get to that part of the game to see if that stayed, right? I was certain that someone would have noticed this and thought this was not authorized by anyone, we are removing this. But no, they are still in there. They're there in every port of the game I've tried. Those little barrels give you a little bit of damage. You have to stand there a long time to die. You have to be really dumb about it, but at least you take damage, right? And I love telling that anecdote only because it's like there's this tiny thing about BioShock Infinite that only exists because of something I did. Now you can join the legions of people that I've told about this that I've annoyed. Even my wife will bring this up, the barrel fire story. You know, she knows it, right? I tell everybody this, so now you know it. Okay, so pain damage, that is definitely a thing that fire, you know, we might want fire to do. Any other environment interactions with this that might make sense? Yes.
Maybe you can set things on fire.
Yeah, setting other things on fire.
Like the rain.
Like what?
Like the rain.
Yes. Yeah, that's good. So, you know, how it affects other things, right? And that's another part of an asset pipeline, right? How is this going to affect potentially other assets? Is this going to cause sort of downstream tasks for other people when it's like, well, now it has to like set the rain on fire, you know, that's going to make more tasks actually. Okay, anything else in terms of environment interactions? Yes.
Placement on it can't be like close to some other thing. Space it out.
Yeah, there might be some placement elements that's sort of related, I think, to other things on fire. I'll just say proximity effects. Okay, so I think we're good. There's probably more environment interactions we can think of, but we're probably solid there. Anything... I hate how these bulleted lists work. I have to like right-click and tell it to shift back. But any other tasks for the dumpster fire? Yeah.
3D modeling it.
Yeah, right. The actual modeling. Yeah, there's some basic things that we're taking for granted. So this list is this is going to be another bullet under environment interactions. But just bear with us. So 3D modeling, right? So the actual creation of the asset itself. Okay. Any more tasks? Yeah.
If the object is ignited, how will the fire spread?
So the spread of the fire, like, yeah, okay. So fire spread. So lots and lots of these, and you can see how these all kind of interact with every discipline potentially. We definitely have some game design things happening here. We definitely have something that programmers might need to be involved in, visual effects artists. Oh, there's one more thing that I'll add. So animations, right? Like we might need a lid to be movable for some reason, right? Now that's a very simple anim, but you know, it's something. So, you know, we can find something for everyone to do potentially, even with an asset like this. Okay, let's continue. All right, let me just make sure I'm in the right spot here. Okay, so just reviewing the steps here. So concept art, paper design. So concept art draws several renderings, perhaps, right? This is a fairly simple asset. And then the art director is going to look at all those concepts, right? It's how concept art works is it's not going to be one concept. You're probably going to get a whole sheet of concepts for something, right? You know, assuming again that this is actually needed for something like this. But you know, here's the thing: even simple objects can benefit from concepting when you're dealing with genres like science fiction or other things where you're making a dumpster that is not necessarily gonna be like just a regular dumpster, right? Then you would need a concept artist, definitely. What's a sci-fi dumpster look like? Now, what's really nice about working in the Aliens universe, like I did for a few years, is mostly the answer is it just looks like what it looks like now. And you look at kind of Aliens and their mythos and their visual and their kind of visual language, you sort of have the Weyland-Yutani tip of the spear, future tech stuff, which paradoxically takes place, you see that mostly in Prometheus, which takes place before the other movies. But then you have the trucker tech, we call it, in that world, right? If you look at the Nostromo from Alien, you look at, I think that's the one from Alien. Maybe that's the ship from Aliens. Can't remember which ships are named what anymore. But, the ship from Alien and the ship from Aliens, those spaceships are like, it's old sort of dot matrix screens, green type, CRT monitors, so we would call that kind of trucker tech, right? Like CB radios on a truck. So a dumpster in the Aliens universe does just look like a dumpster, right? There's no special sci-fi version of it. So it depends on the sort of the mythos you're working with. Okay, so again, the programmers may start to produce pseudocode, designers may paper design. We talked about the various steps here that happen. So step 2, now that we're past this initial mock-up stage, concepts have been made, paper design work has been done. Modelers, environment artists, now can use that concept art to create the dumpster model. Programmers, now here's where things get a little bit tricky in a pipeline and where game producers can really flex their muscle in terms of how to solve these dependencies. So programmers can either wait for the completed model, so now they're done with this, right? And they're just sitting back, chilling, probably working on other stuff, obviously. Or they can get a quick white box version of the dumpster model, right? And this is kind of a thing that studios do differently, and it's a little bit controversial sometimes in studios. Do you just immediately, does a artist take an asset like this and just make it into a white box right away, which for this would practically be like a square cube. It'd be hardly anything. Maybe a square cube with little wheel things on the bottom or something, right? Maybe they would have the lid so the anims can be done, maybe, right? So do you take that white box and allow everyone else that's not an artist to start using it, right? Designers placing it in levels, programmers starting to program with it, VFX artists using it to place where the fire particles are, all that? Or do you wait for the artist to just finish it, right? So now you have the finished thing, it's all rigged up, the parts that are able to be animated or ready to go, and different studios do that differently, okay? So that's kind of a tricky part of a pipeline is how fast do you get these things in game? And that's going to work a little differently everywhere you work, or any, different companies do this differently. So what I wanted to ask you is, what are the pros and cons with waiting for this asset to get done by the art team, which may take, hopefully for something like this, not long, but more than probably, it's not going to be instant. It's going to be some period of time. Or pushing forward immediately with an incomplete prototype. So just to make sure you understand the choice clearly. So choice 1 is all the departments have to wait for that asset to be completely done by art. So, then art hands you just a totally finished thing. Or you use a mock-up, like a white box that the art team does in like a few minutes, and then you start working with this while they are creating the finished asset. Pros and cons to each approach. So let me start this. What are some pros of waiting? What are some pros of waiting for the finished asset? Yeah.
It's easier to see like the final product in action and find any problems that would come along with the finished model as well as the animation.
Yeah, and in case, because this is not going to get on the recording, I'll repeat the answer that it's easier to see the final product. Right, that was essentially what you were saying. Yeah, and yeah, that does happen when, in my experience, when management, when they have resisted white box versions of things being put in the games early, and this could extend to AIs, to all kinds of things, pretty much any game asset, right? When I've seen resistance to the idea of using the white box stuff right away, it does come from this notion of it's really hard sometimes to squint. And I think that's an important concept to remember as a game developer. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is that when stuff isn't completely done, we sometimes don't see the point of it, right? And with the dumpster fire example, I can imagine this happening because it's just going to be a cube. That's the white box version of it, right? It's just going to be a cube, and maybe there's some temp particles on it or whatever. And you may not, when you're play testing your game, your studio may not see the utility in it. This is just a stupid white cube that damages me. Why does this matter, right? It won't seem cool because they can't see the finished product, right? And that does happen. You do have that happen a lot. So what about some cons with waiting for the final product? Any cons? Yeah.
You have to wait, so it takes a lot longer.
Yeah, I mean, there is the waiting, right? I mean, that kind of is I think readily apparent, and that can actually be very hurtful, right? Because what ends up happening in game development is you have this problem of things being in stasis, right? Games are really hard to make, and there's studio morale, and if you're not getting new content in the game, on a regular basis, your studio can actually get burned out. You can totally get burned out, especially if you're doing regular play tests. You're not seeing progress. You're not seeing new things get put in there, even if they're rough. There's design ramifications of waiting, right? As a level designer, it's really hard to make great levels when there's things that are coming, but they're not there yet. But you have to kind of mentally plan for them to be there, right? So again, using the dumpster fire example, if I know I have these cool things I can place that are going to hurt players and spread fire around and catch other things on fire and do all these things, but I don't actually have some primitive version of it to play with, it's going to be hard to design good levels around that mechanic because I have nothing to, actually place, right? And I have to sort of use my mind to imagine how to build my levels around this instead of having the actual thing. Now, I do think it's a really good skill as a level designer to be able to do that a little bit because you're never going to have everything, right? Like making video games professionally is not like using, Halo Forge or Mario Maker or all that, where all the tools are there. That's just not the reality we have. So there'll always be part of that. But if we can avoid that, that's good. That's a good thing. So I think these pros and cons, I think it's sort of 50-50. Like I could see, because the squinting problem, I don't want to soft pedal that. I think that's actually a major issue, right? Like seeing a bunch of incomplete assets in the game can be very, very difficult for people, right? That can cause a lot of problems, a lot of misconceptions about the game you're making. So, but not having quick access to things as they're moving through the pipeline is also very problematic. So this is a tough thing. My personal preference is just to get the white box stuff. And that's kind of how I am with things in general. My attitude of game development is always personally give me the early stuff. Let's just learn how to squint because I know it's hard, but let's just learn how to do it. My attitude's always, hey, programmers, give me the scripter, all the hooks, expose all the variables, just trust me. That's kind of my game development ethos or raison d'etre, if you will. But that doesn't mean it's right in all circumstances, right? These things could go either way. Okay, so leaving that issue aside here, let's talk about now we've started this asset. It's being made by the art team. And there's been a 3D model created, but now we need to texture it. So texture artists create and apply the materials. Animators may create a rig. If a rig may not be necessary for something this simple, but funny story about that, not really funny, but just a story, is when I was helping with the Virtual Labs project, we would have the riggers make rigs for things this simple, really because we needed them to have work, right? That was that sometimes with these academic projects that you get student interns and there's a certain amount of work that you have to give them so they qualify for the internship. And so I remember having to have riggers make rigs for even the simplest of things, right? So yeah, an object like this probably doesn't require a rig, but you could, okay? VFX artists, they now have all the tools they need to actually finish and create the fire effect because they have the 3D model there. They know where it should go. They should know where where the effects go and everything. And programmers at this stage are wrapping up the gameplay functionality. Okay, so I see class discussion. Hopefully when I read this slide, I remember, this is part of going back to material that I haven't done in a while, what the discussion is. Okay, right, so I think I know. So, okay, at this point now, we have a prototype, finished, maybe even shippable candidate of the dumpster fire now. It's been textured, the model's done, and now the level designer is definitely using this in their levels and missions. Try to imagine in your head as best you can, and let's make this easy. Let's pretend this is, we'll just say a first-person shooter. I know that's like the most bland genre imaginable, but just everyone kind of knows what that is, so we'll use that. Imagine this first-person shooter, and we have this dumpster fire, and let's just imagine it does everything that you all say it could do, right? It catches other things on fire. The fire spreads. It does damage. The lid can move. I'll even add one that, like, if you shoot it, it'll explode, because this is just what we do in games. We make things explode, okay? Imagine it does all those things. Do you think it'll be a good asset? Do you think it'll work well, right? What problems, let me put it this way, what problems do you think might occur? Yes?
What if the aesthetic of the game doesn't match the dumpster fire?
So the game, you're saying that the game may not match, the overall game design, if you will, won't necessarily match what the dumpster fire is doing. It may conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really good. So let's try to drill down from that. In what ways may it fight our overall game design? Yeah.
You can focus on a dumpster fire more than you can focus on the surrounding areas. That's like put too much time into this small thing that probably a lot of people won't even notice, because it's just in the background, sort of.
Yeah, so it may fight our game design in that it may be something where the player may not even interact with this that much, right? Like, and we've all sort of played games, I think, where there's some little feature that you barely use to the point where you wonder why is it even there, right? And that would obviously be a tremendous mistake in resources if that happens. And that would sort of be, if we look back all the way here on one of our first slides, this would be a failure of this stage, right? Like the very first stage, figuring out if you should do it at all, right? And that, unfortunately, that does happen. So how about positive things? What might be good about this in a first-person shooter, right? Just your standard, let's say 2016 Doom style first-person shooter. Yeah.
It could enhance strategies, so maybe you have to shoot. You said it could explode, so maybe you position enemies around it, use it as like a tool to eliminate them.
Yeah, definitely. And again, for the recording's sake, it could increase strategy, give players more interesting choices. Yeah, I can definitely see that playing out. To me, something like this, an asset like this, especially if we add the exploding thing, it's definitely something that I like to this is my own personal slang. I call this a whammy bar, right? Anyone play guitar? Anyone know what a whammy bar is? It's that bar on a guitar that makes the pitch go up and down, right? That's a whammy bar, okay? It's probably more accurate to call it a pitch shift bar, whatever. But I call things like this a whammy bar because in guitar playing, like just grabbing the whammy bar and just going like that sounds really cool, but takes very little skill to do, right? It's just like this incredibly simple thing that you can do that will make you sound incredible on guitar. So in game dev, anytime I look at something and it's like a pretty simple thing, but yet gives you instant fun or coolness, I call that a whammy bar. And anything that's explodey is totally a whammy bar, right? On Aliens Fireteam Elite, it's like I think there was some resistance to exploding barrels for a long time. Like, they just, it's just so basic. Why would it just makes no sense they would leave these barrels that would blow up everywhere. Why are we doing this? And then finally, I think it was the junior systems designer. Okay, and if you remember, you had this lecture where Professor Whittinghill talked about the difference between the programmatic style of systems designer and the sort of game design systems designer. This was a game design systems designer, someone working in Excel spreadsheets, that type of systems designer. This was actually someone we hired that was just like 19, actually, I think. That does happen sometimes, which hopefully doesn't make you feel bad, but it is very rare. It's very rare, for that to happen. So basically this 19-year-old was like, yeah, I don't care. I'm going to make exploding barrels because they're cool. And he was right. it was cool, right? Like, it immediately improved the game and made it more fun. So that is, the whammy bar things are like that, right? An art whammy bar, for those of you that are going to go into art, we're running out of time here, is like whenever you go into like some room and there's like sweet light shafts coming through like the window above, that's an art whammy bar. We have lots of whammy bars, and sometimes you can overdo that, but generally they're like these easy wins that just look cool and make the game more fun. Okay, so we just got a little bit more to go here. So now we have a fully complete asset. It's been play tested. We like it. It's been iterated on. And now just some takeaways here. There's no official pipeline. Everyone figures this out on their own. Like Volition does it differently than Roundhouse Studios, or they do it differently than Infinity Ward. Everyone kind of has their own version of it. But the main takeaway that is going to be consistent is assets are hot potatoes, right? They bounce around all these different departments. They affect everybody. And so game making, as it turns out, isn't just this process of everyone kind of putting their heads down and doing their individual thing. It requires all this cross communication between departments, between developers. You have to be aware of what everyone else is doing if you want to be a good game developer. And hopefully this lecture sort of demonstrates why that is so. Okay, folks, that's it. Hopefully you'll see Dave. I don't think he's too